This week in IT, Copilot Vision raises eyebrows amongst Windows 11 users. Microsoft didn't properly patch SharePoint and it leads to hundreds of compromised servers. And a 158-year-old logistics company in the UK collapses after a ransomware attack. So stay tuned for all the latest. Welcome to This Week in IT, the show where I talk about everything connected to Windows, Azure, and Microsoft 365. We've talked a little bit about Copilot Vision in the past on this channel, but it's been making some waves in the media this week as Microsoft describe a little bit more about how it works. Now, this has already come to users in Edge, and it's also coming to Windows 11. And unlike Windows Recall, the controversial feature for its Copilot Plus PCs, that does all of the processing on board, so it uses the local NPU in these PCs to essentially analyze the screenshots that takes every 3 seconds or so, and essentially allows you to search using natural language. You could describe an image and it will hopefully go back to that image and pull it up for you. Copilot Vision is a little bit different in that it uses a large language model in the cloud. So you have to be connected to the internet for Copilot Vision to work. Now, Copilot Vision differs from Windows Recall. You can think of Windows Recall as search on steroids, if you like. But Copilot Vision is aimed to actually not only analyze what it can see on your screen at any one time, but also enable you to ask questions and get help about the content that you're currently working on. So there's quite a big difference between these two features. Now, as I said, Copilot Vision needs to contact the Microsoft servers in the cloud for all of this to work. And of course, there are some privacy concerns around that. Now, this week, Microsoft is saying that Copilot Vision isn't going to store those screenshots that it takes long term, but it is going to store the chats that you make to its AI assistant. So, of course, what long term means, nobody really understands at this moment. But it seems that in order for Copilot Vision to be helpful, the local language model that Windows Recall is using isn't powerful enough to power Copilot Vision, at least not at this stage. Much like Windows Recall, nobody is forcing you to use this feature. If you activate Vision while you're in a Copilot session, then it will actively be recording your screen, and it uses optical character recognition to understand what's on your screen, and Microsoft says to give you step-by-step guidance, maybe through a process, or maybe you have some questions about something you're doing research on. And as soon as you turn off Copilot Vision, then it's no longer recording what it can see on your screen, and also not sending any data after that point to Microsoft servers in the cloud. At the moment, this technology is only available to users in the US. Now, I did see Copilot Vision pop up in my Edge browser. This was already about a month ago when they released the previous update to Edge. I suspect that might have been an error because I'm in the EU. My device is set to an EU country, so maybe I shouldn't have seen that, but it did appear briefly. And the same thing is with Copilot Vision. So it's now available to Windows insiders in the US, and Microsoft says that it's going to be rolling this out to non-EU countries at some point in the future. If you're an organization, you don't need to worry too much about this feature because it's obviously something you're going to be able to control from an organizational level. If you're worried about Microsoft storing data in the cloud, especially what it can see on your screen at any one time, then of course the option here is simply don't use it. Windows Recall you can also disable and switch off if you want. You can also switch it on and off depending on particular applications that you're using at the time. So you do have control over what these technologies are storing, but not necessarily where it's sending that information to in the case of Copilot Vision. So you're going to have to make that call yourself Do you trust Microsoft with your screenshots or not? And of course, that's a very big question. And we have to kind of accept at this stage that these technologies aren't all going to be able to run on a local MPU, because the power that they require is just so great. It's only something that can really be processed in one of Microsoft's data centers. So you can choose to maybe use that technology based on that knowledge or not. It might be that at some point in the future we will see a version of something like Copilot Vision being able to run on the local device, but I think we're many years away from that happening at this stage. And then of course there's the question about how well this thing actually works, how useful it's going to be. If you do decide to use it, we're going to have to see what the results are, and of course the proof is always in the pudding. Before I go into the next story, I'd like to ask you a quick favor. About 74% of the people who watched the last video weren't subscribed to the channel. Now, as we go live today, we're on about 13,015 subscribers. I'd love it if you could push that up to 13,100. So if you find this content useful and you'd like to see these weekly news roundups from Petri, then please subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the bell notification to make sure that you don't miss out on the latest uploads. Last weekend, stories started to come in about a flaw that was identified back in May that Microsoft knew about in May for SharePoint Server, so it's affecting SharePoint Server 2016, 2019, and SharePoint Server Subscription Edition. This flaw was known about. It was discovered by somebody who identified the flaw and responsibly reported it to Microsoft. And on July the 8th, Microsoft released a patch that was supposed to plug this flaw. Now, unfortunately, the patch was simply not effective. And starting on around July the 17th, antivirus vendors started to notice activity that suggested there were some problems with SharePoint servers. And absolutely between about July the 17th and I think July the 22nd, about 400 organizations were compromised, including a major Western government. And since July the 8th, Microsoft has released another patch which they say now does effectively patch this flaw. Now, it seems in the last couple of years Microsoft has a habit of releasing updates that don't effectively patch a problem. They seem to do a bit of a half-assed job, if I can put it not quite so politely, on these things. And it took another couple of weeks for Microsoft to really patch it properly. The guy who identified this was somebody who took part in a security competition that was run by Trend Micro in Berlin, and he won $100,000 for identifying this flaw. And why is this notable? Well, because some really important agencies like the National Nuclear Security Administration in the States was compromised, and of course once you're compromising those kind of organizations, this already is really serious. Now, Microsoft and Google are attributing this attack to a organization that they believed is linked to the Chinese state. And of course, if you've got SharePoint and you're running that on premises, it's important to now make sure that you have the up-to-date security patches applied to your servers. It's often that small organizations think that they're not at risk from viruses, ransomware, all that kind of thing. They don't believe they've got anything valuable enough to take. But this week there were reports that a 158-year-old logistics company in the UK, KMP, essentially collapsed because they were hit by ransomware. Now, we don't know the exact amount of the demand that was made for the systems to be unencrypted, but it's thought that it would probably have been around £5 million. They simply didn't have that kind of cash to throw at this problem, and therefore they lost all of their data, which essentially means losing their entire business. Now, it's not often that you hear of entire businesses collapsing like this because of ransomware, but it's a real problem, and 700 employees lost their jobs essentially. So that's a really again, significant attack and having a really significant effect on people's lives. Now, why did this happen? Because there was an employee who had a weak password and the attackers were simply able to guess it. It was as simple as that. Now, KMP says that they were following all the cybersecurity best practices, all the rest of it. Well, if a user was able to have such a weak password that the hackers were easily able to guess it, then I suspect that there must have been a gap in their cybersecurity plan. So what can we learn about this kind of attack? Well, prevention is better than cure, so obviously making sure that you're following cybersecurity best practices and making sure that they're being enforced. So if you have a password policy, it's no good having that password policy if you're not programmatically enforcing it on your systems to make sure that users are using long, complex passwords, or maybe using multi-factor authentication, something like Windows Hello for Business, or using passkeys to not use passwords at all, because here the password is obviously the weakest link. Now, if the worst does happen, because there's never such a thing as 100% secure, you cannot be 100% secure, it's impossible, make sure that you've got backups that are air-gapped and immutable so that hackers cannot get at them, because if this company had had appropriate backups in place, they would simply have been able to restore the data without having to even think about paying the ransom that was being demanded from them. So it's important that you have backups and that the backups are not accessible to the main network, that they're kept physically separately, or if it's network based, that they're air gapped, and to make sure that those backups can't be changed, make them immutable. There's lots of technologies that allow you to put that kind of thing into place. So they are probably the two most important things that you need to worry about. If you found this video useful, I'd appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up, because it helps to get it seen by more people and to grow the channel. I'm going to leave you with another video on the screen now that talks about how Microsoft is working with antivirus vendors to take that critical antivirus code out of the kernel, so do check that out. But that's it from me for this week, and I'll see you next time.